What is going on, everyone? My name is Niraj, and welcome to my series Unseen, which is part of the Forgotten Generation podcast. In this series, we'll be focusing on the topic of invisible disabilities and discuss lived experiences of individuals that have an invisible disability. As a disclaimer, whilst me and my guests will be touching on personal topics, we are not experts and are only speaking from our lived experiences, and everyone will have different lived experiences. What is going on, everyone? My name is Niraj, and welcome to another episode of the Forgotten Generation podcast. Today, I'm joined by Elia, who's going to be speaking about her experience with chronic fatigue syndrome. So, this is what I'm really looking forward to because, yeah, chronic fatigue syndrome is something which affects a lot of people but isn't talked about a lot. So, I'm really grateful that, Elia, you've taken the time to kind of talk about your own experiences as well as things that, some key takeaways that listeners can take away from this. So, hi, Elia, how have you been doing?
Yeah, I've been okay, thank you. How have you been?
Yeah, not too bad. It's the long weekend, bank holiday weekend, so I am grateful for the extra day in the
Yeah,
weekend. Do you have any plans for the bank holiday weekend or?
no, honestly, not really. Have you got any plans for the rest of it?
No, not really. I probably would watch the cricket and it's the final day of the Premier League football season, so I'm probably going to follow that as well.
Yeah,
So then Monday, hopefully, we're going squash.
nice.
But yeah, as I said again, thank you again for joining us and talking about your experience with chronic fatigue syndrome. So, do you want to kind of start by introducing yourself and maybe sharing a bit about your experience with chronic fatigue syndrome?
Okay, so yeah, I'm Elia. I'm 18 years old, currently completing an animal management course at college. I've been living with CFS for over 7 years now. It's worsened over time. Finally got diagnosed around about this time last year. It was March time, I think. Gotten progressively worse this past year. I've had to give up a part-time job to complete my college course, and just generally everything's been made a lot harder by the illness. Generally,
No, okay, yeah. So there's that your formal diagnosis you only got last year.
yeah. So I've been living with the symptoms since I was 11, but formally diagnosed last year.
Okay, and then when did you first realize something more was going on with your energy levels, and then kind of how did that kind of start showing up in your life?
So I fainted at 11 years old. I was walking to school and just passed out middle of a road. Luckily, I was with people. That happened again a couple times that year, just fainting randomly. I've learnt the warning signs of fainting now, so mostly I'm not passing out all over the place, but the symptoms haven't really gone away. Around, I think it was about 2022, everything started getting worse. Like, there was debilitating fatigue on top of the dizziness and fainting. It became a massively prevalent part of my life, just struggling with concentrating and managing anything generally.
Okay, so it was kind of, as you said, was it 2022 you said where kind of things started getting more progressively
That was when I
worse?
first noticed the actual fatigue side of things. I was sat, I think it was a physics lesson, and I just realised that I felt absolutely exhausted, and it was just a Monday morning. I know obviously everyone feels tired on a Monday, but I suddenly noticed that that wasn't the normal Monday tiredness.
Okay. No, that makes sense. Yeah, I know at work people it's a bit easy to get a bit sluggish on that Monday morning. So I definitely can relate to the Monday feeling. I actually love Mondays. I feel I have the most energy on a Monday and I get more tired as I go along in the week if the week's really busy.
Yeah,
So yeah, would you say obviously your symptoms and how they've kind of shown up, would you say some of them has been more like invisible symptoms, or would you say a lot of the symptoms are kind of visible on the outside?
I think most of my symptoms are sort of invisible to others. I think it's quite hard to tell. I'm quite good at sort of masking what's going on, and just carrying on. However, the dizziness side of things often means even if I'm not actually fainting visibly, I have to lie down or sit on the floor for a couple hours, it can be sometimes. So that's obviously visible to other people.
Okay, so more the signs of when is it the fainting itself? Obviously that's visible, but when you're kind of the signs of being dizzy, are the actual signs visible on the outside, or is it actually what's actually visible is when you have to sit down, take more care of yourself?
I go pale beforehand and sometimes shaky, but most of it's anything that is visible is very subtle. So it's more me actually. It's quite invisible to most other people, I think.
Okay, so that makes sense. So I guess with your chronic fatigue syndrome, it's a mix of symptoms which are more visible and easier to kind of detect, as well as invisible symptoms which are not always obvious on the outside. And also, you say that you kind of have to mask a lot with some of the symptoms that are a bit more invisible and not easily seen on the outside. So, how does that in particular affect you both physically and emotionally? Firstly, with the symptoms which are visible, like the fainting, the dizziness spells, but also the ones which are less visible and actually you feel like you have to mask a bit more in order to navigate that?
Yeah, I think physically, obviously, it makes everything harder to manage. I've got to carefully manage energy levels to complete anything. But emotionally as well, where it's especially the invisible side of things, where people can't see, there's a lot of guilt I feel surrounding it. I really struggle with asking for help, and that's something I need to do a lot of with how things are. And because it's invisible, I'm always worried that people are thinking I'm exaggerating or making it up and just after extra help, which obviously isn't what's going on. But it's something that I've always struggled to accept, and needing to do it a lot more because of my CFS is unpleasant, if that makes sense.
Okay, so yeah, it's the asking for help, which is quite challenging for you,
Yeah,
is that correct?
definitely.
And is it obviously asking for help, is it difficult because you feel people won't be accommodating when you ask for help, or is it kind of you want to feel a bit more, let's say, independent? I don't know if independent is the right word, but something maybe similar feelings to independence, and actually asking for help goes against that. So what do you think is the difficulty you find when asking for help? Is it a bit of both?
I think it's definitely mostly the independence thing because in the past I've had some people that haven't been the most accommodating, different places at school and things. However, honestly, at the moment, the support I've got is incredible. I've never had to worry about them not accommodating, but I I like being able to do things myself. Independence definitely is a fitting word there. I like having the independence, and having to ask for help sort of goes against that quite badly.
No, no, definitely. And do you feel that in, let's say, when you think about, let's say, your identity and thinking about that, chronic fatigue syndrome, in to some extent, is kind of a loss of independence, or do you feel it's a bit more complex than just a loss of independence? Do you feel there's more to it?
I think there's is definitely a loss of independence. It's a very complicated thing, I suppose, because there's the loss of independence with it, but there's just I don't know. Trying to think of words is not going well. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, loss of independence definitely. Identity with it is sort of finding who you are with the symptoms, where there's a lot of things that I used to really enjoy doing that I can't just, it's not as simple anymore. I can still manage a lot of things, and then there's other things that you can't manage. And it's just working out who you are with those things missing.
Okay, like, if you don't mind me asking, do you want to give maybe one or two examples of things that maybe you want to do, but it's not so easy?
I've always, especially with summer coming up, water sports and things have always been something I've every summer gone to camps, been in the sea, surfing, paddleboarding, all that kind of thing. And while I can sometimes still manage things like it, it's a lot more difficult. There's got to be pacing leading up to it. And then it's sometimes when I'm doing it, I'll then get really dizzy and feel faint. And obviously, then if I'm about to faint, it's not safe to be in the sea for
No,
obvious
definitely.
reasons. So that's quite heartbreaking. The stuff that I enjoy doing, having to stop.
No, yeah, I mean, that must be, quite difficult to obviously navigate. And obviously, as you said, like how there's a lot more, even if you are to do those things, that there's a lot of extra effort needed in terms of kind of planning energy levels, kind of thinking about extra accommodations that you might need to be able to do the activity you want to do. So definitely, yeah, I can see why in a in more than one way it is more difficult than you would like. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And in terms of what people misunderstand about chronic fatigue syndrome, is there anything that you found is commonly kind of brought up, which is kind of actually, let me just say this question again. I'm going to edit this out. So, do you think there's things that people kind of easily misunderstand about chronic fatigue syndrome, which you've kind of seen time and time and again?
I think CFS is often misunderstood as just being just a bit tired, which, I mean, the name sort of gives way to that, I guess, because even in the name of the illness, it's chronic fatigue, and it's so much more than that. It's not just feeling tired. Even the fatigue is a lot more than just tired. But outside of that, it's a multisystemic disease. It affects everything. It causes debilitating symptoms, even at its mildest, because obviously I'm quite lucky that mine is mild, which always feels a bit weird saying mild because it still causes such difference in what you're able to do. But I think a lot of people see it as, oh, you're just feeling tired, you can't manage your energy, which that's a big part of it. But there's a lot more to it, and I think people need to sort of see that more.
No, definitely. And am I right in saying that? I mean, it might be another diagnosis which I'm mixing up, but is there kind of like four stages, four levels? Like there's mild, severe, and there's two others?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's mild, moderate, and then I'm not sure, severe, and I can't remember.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I think no, I've definitely seen this when I've done research in the past that there is kind of four
Yeah, I'm
different
sure I have seen
categories.
four. I just can't
And I
think.
think it links to chronic fatigue, but yeah, I'm just not remembering it. And when I've kind of the previous episode which I recorded about POTS, we kind of talked about how with POTS it's something that you can't always control when the symptoms kind of arise, when there's kind of like flare-ups and things. Would you say that's kind of similar with chronic fatigue in terms of, let's say, your body, it's hard to kind of control when you have, let's say, a fainting episode or you feel dizzy or other things? Or do you feel it's easy for you to know when kind of the symptoms are coming?
There's times when it's easy. There's certain things that I know if I do that, it's going to cause me to flare up. I'm going to end up feeling faint. It's going to worsen. Obviously, general things. My college course is quite a practical one. There's things with animals. I know that after a practical, I'm going to feel unwell. But there's also sometimes just randomly you'll be doing something and all of a sudden all of my symptoms come on and I need to sit down, I need to lie down, water, do what I need to do to recover. And there's not much warning and you've just got to almost let that happen. There's no control over it, which is really hard to deal with, I think.
No, I can see that because especially like when it comes to thinking about coping strategies or thinking about how to balance pushing yourself against the chronic fatigue, it's often kind of you can have all the planning in the world, you can have all the coping strategies in the world, but there might be a time that no matter how perfect you are in terms of implementing them, there can still be something that just comes out of the blue. Do you feel that's kind of resonates with your experience?
Definitely. That's absolutely it. Just sometimes it just happens. You can be doing everything right and you're still, something will cause you to flare.
Yeah, and is that something you feel you can kind of mentally prepare for, like knowing that there could be a curveball at any time and really you can't prepare for it, it's just kind of basically dealing with it there and then? Do you feel it's easy to mentally prepare for that?
It's something that I like to think I'm mentally prepared for. I always think that I know it could happen and I'm ready for it. And then it actually happens, and there's a lot of grief surrounding it, because as much as I know it can happen and I've tried to prepare myself for it, I don't think I can ever properly be ready for suddenly everything to just feel awful again.
Okay, so yeah, I think you spoke about grief there. Do you want to kind of explain that a bit more? Kind of how that kind of manifests and what does it really entail in terms of this?
Yeah, so obviously I've been living with my symptoms for 7 years now. I was a child really when it happened. So there's a lot of things that I've always wanted to be able to do. And with the CFS, there's a lot of grief with, am I going to be able to do it? There's a lot of things I've had to give up or relearn about myself. And I find that quite hard to sort of grieving the person that I was, but also who I thought I was going to be. You know, I had all these plans of all these things I wanted to do. So, sure, I was 11. Some of them are a bit out there anyway. But there's most of the time I'm okay with it. I'm sort of used to it. You know, that's what I've got. It is what it is, that sort of thing. But I think anyone with any kind of chronic illness, there's an element of grief that comes with it.
No, yeah, I completely understand. I think it's kind of not necessarily grief with you're grieving the previous version of yourself, but it's almost, I don't know if this is right, but kind of grieving the future version of yourself that wants to do all these things, but there are limitations. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely.
No, yeah, and I can see why obviously when it comes to well-being and emotionally that will have an impact, and that kind of that impact is more than just the symptoms itself. It's kind of that worry for the future.
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of kind of moving on and thinking about the people around you, the support you have, the relationships with your family and friends, how easy do you find is it to explain your limitations to maybe friends, maybe family, maybe people at school, especially when obviously there's physical symptoms which people can see, but with the symptoms or kind of things that they can't necessarily see what you're dealing with. So, for example, the emotional stress or kind of the symptoms of chronic fatigue, which are not visible. How easy do you find it is to explain all of that to the people around you?
It's something I really struggle with. I quite find it quite difficult to talk about how it affects me and my feelings with it. I'm really lucky that the friends around me understand, like just from being around me and hearing little tiny snippets all the time, they're very understanding, which is something I know that I'm lucky to have, because obviously I can't expect that from people. If I can't explain it, I shouldn't be expecting them to be able to understand. But it's a really complicated thing to explain. So it's through a lot of actual NHS website information I tend to give people to explain it, because I struggle to explain it in my own words. There's bits that I'll add to it, and specifically my experiences and things come into it. But it takes quite a while for me to be able to open up and explain it properly.
No, I think that makes sense because, in a way, people think it's similar to tiredness, but it's actually a lot more, and it's actually quite complex when you think about how symptoms manifest, kind of the after impacts, what you need to do to cope with it. All those things are quite hard, even probably for the person like you that has the diagnosis to kind of explain to others. And I guess when obviously, I think it's kind of a good idea to actually refer them to an NHS website which has, reputable and correct information, but at the same time caveating that this is just a general overview. And then you kind of speak a little bit more about how your lived experiences link to that. So I think kind of having that balance of here is some more general information, but here is a bit more about how it impacts me in particular, so you know how to support me as an individual best.
Yeah.
I think that's really good, and I think I definitely can see why you find it is quite hard to explain to others. And do you feel that there's almost a need of that kind of when it comes to people trying to support you, people trying to be there for you, that you yourself need that sort of self-awareness that obviously you want people around you to support you, to accommodate you, but when it comes to when you find it hard to, let's say, explain everything, and it's hard being vulnerable as well, people don't know what they don't know. So if there are things that you haven't shared, it's hard to expect other people to understand that if you haven't shared it. Do you feel that there's a lot of self-awareness that you've had to do with that?
Yeah, I think it's sort of knowing that, some people won't understand, and I've not explained it to them, so I can't expect them to understand. There's never any upset that they don't. If it's something I've not explained, I've just got to know that that's sort of not my fault, but it is on me that they don't understand it. And it's nothing that I'm upset that I haven't said, and it's not something that I'm upset with myself or them for, but it's something that I've just got to be aware of.
Okay, yeah. So definitely, being aware that, if there's stuff that you haven't told, most of the time there's probably very valid reasons why you haven't shared that, maybe because it's too vulnerable, it's too personal, or you might find it very hard to explain. But just understanding that, if you haven't shared it, that's not on them to kind of magically understand the things you
Yeah,
haven't
exactly.
shared. That's more on you to, decide either I don't want to share it and that's fine, or if I want to get the support for that thing specifically, I need to share some stuff regarding that.
Yeah.
And in terms of kind of the support and understanding, because I think generally when I've spoken to people with just diagnosis in general, it doesn't have to be chronic fatigue, it can be just anything in general, like even, let's say, neurodiversity or even being from an ethnic minority or anything in general, it's not always easy for people to fully understand if they don't have the lived experiences. There's always going to be a slight barrier where you're trying to get support for a specific lived experience, but the people that want to support you don't have that lived experience, so they can't relate fully. In terms of for your own chronic fatigue syndrome, and especially with the people that maybe don't have that lived experience, i.e., they don't have the diagnosis, what kind of support or understanding has been the most meaningful to you?
I, again, very lucky with the support I've got. I've got through the college course specifically, the friends and even the teachers I've got around me have just been incredible, just understanding what I'm going through. Like, I won't have to massively explain it, and they just understand, and they've just been there for me, and sort of just believing it, I think, is a main thing, because things like CFS, there's a lot of disbelief surrounding it. People that don't necessarily believe the symptoms, and or not even necessarily that. There is a lot of that, but also just general understanding, and the fact that these people just immediately believe me and immediately are there for me and do what they can to help has meant the world to me. Just they'll I've got friends that are there if I can complain about the same thing over and over about how the symptoms affect me, and they're just there, they listen, and I'm so grateful for all of the support there.
Yeah, I think I'm really glad to hear that, you've had really good support in place from your family, from your friends, from your school. I think, yeah, that's always great to hear, like, and also how you said that you don't necessarily just have to feel like you have to explain yourself every single time you're facing a challenge. Like, obviously people aren't going to 100% get it, but you can kind of just say, "Oh, I'm not feeling great," and they'll try to understand, they'll get it.
Yeah.
And also with your friends, like the fact that you can kind of talk, you never feel like you're a burden to them. And I think that's really important because, the worst thing when you want to get support from someone is feeling like you're a burden to them. And how easy is it for your friends to support you if they don't have the lived experiences? Is it just the main thing that really helps you is them listening, and actually listening is very, very easy? So yeah, just want to get your views on how easy is it for your friends to support you when they don't have the lived experience themselves?
I think it's fairly easy, I hope, because I'd hate for them to be having to do something difficult. But it's just the listening and just the physically being there. So when my symptoms are really bad, when I'm laid on the floor, when I'm feeling faint, just having them there with me, sat with me, talking to me, just being there, not having to do anything medically, not having to be asking if I'm okay, but just being there, being a friend, having it as just a normal, just being there for me, listening is all I really need, I think, from friends.
No, I think, yeah, and that's something really important because especially when it comes to support, it's not necessarily, okay, I've got this bunch of solutions for you. It's actually just listening, and from your perspective, actually feeling like you're heard. That's probably bigger than any advice that you might give. And I think also another point that you mentioned, which I think is a really important takeaway, not just for chronic fatigue syndrome, but for anything in general, is your friends don't try and do anything, let's say, medically, because whilst anyone wants to have good intentions, they want to help you, if you're not a medical professional, you can't, for example, diagnose someone. And I think that's maybe not applicable to your case because you already have the diagnosis, but just knowing that, you're not a medical professional and you're not an expert in these issues is really important. And I think it looks like your friends are very mindful of that, which I think is really good.
Yeah,
And yeah, do you find, obviously, I think we talked about how, chronic fatigue syndrome can be quite unpredictable. There are times where it just comes out of the blue and you just have to deal with it there and then. So obviously there is that challenge. But do you find that there's kind of any coping strategies or any environments that help you in particular?
I think, I suppose it changes depending on the person, but for me, familiarity is something that makes it easier to deal with. I've always struggled with changes of any kind. Like even pre-CFS, I've just struggled with change. And now I've got chronic fatigue syndrome. The changes happening worsen all of my symptoms, worsen everything. So having a familiar place or something familiar, even just having something that is a person, an object, something there that I know helps a bit. Yeah.
So okay, interesting. That's interesting. And something that came up in my mind when listening to that is, do you feel not school, but actually the routine of going to school Monday to Friday, the familiarity of that routine, like you've got a set start time, you've got a set end time, that routine actually helps you?
Routine is definitely something that massively helps. It's something for my well-being anyway. I like having a routine. I like knowing what I'm doing when. But also, by having a routine, I know how much energy I'm using each day. I can pace a lot better because I know that during the week I'm doing this at these times, finishing then, able to rest here, and I can work out what that's going to take in a routine to scheduled time. Whereas without a routine, without plans, it's a lot more unpredictable.
No, I can definitely see that. I can definitely see that because obviously, whilst there are times where chronic fatigue is just quite unpredictable, there are also aspects of chronic fatigue syndrome which are also a bit more predictable. So it's not that, okay, chronic fatigue is unpredictable, so I'm going to do no planning whatsoever. You can do some level of planning, let's say these coping strategies, and you bake them into your routine. You think about how this might impact your energy levels. Again, factor that in a routine when you're doing something. but also at the same time understanding that even a perfect plan may have to be adjusted because a curveball comes there and then.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good point. And yeah, it looks like, it's something that even from this conversation, I'm learning from you and you talking about your experiences and how there needs to be a balance between planning, having the coping strategies, but also a bit of winging it on the spot, I guess, when you have, let's say, chronic fatigue kind of coming all of a sudden. Is that
Yeah.
the right word? Like just winging it. Sometimes you have to wing it a bit.
Yeah, I guess so. It's just the having a plan, but also having the awareness that I might have to go off the plan if my symptoms worsen in any way.
No, I think that's a really good thing to recognize. So I'm I know I'm kind of proud of you for recognizing that, things might have to adjust there and then and just trying the best you can when that happens. But yeah, a final question for me before we end this is what advice would you give to someone that has been diagnosed with CFS, is again in a similar position to you, that they're worried about the future, they're worried about things they may not be able to do because of it? What advice would you give to them in terms of navigating that going forward?
So recently, I was actually within the past week, I've been given a piece of advice that I've sort of immediately taken to heart, and I think is something that for anyone, but just don't lose hope. Anything, it's sometimes things feel really hopeless with it, and a CFS diagnosis is scary. There's limited knowledge about it, next to no treatment for it. But I think you need an element of hope that it will get better, because without that, it's going to be so much harder to deal with. And just if you're going through it, be kind to yourself. It's not your fault. It's just something that you've got to deal with, and you're trying your best, and that's all that matters. Just do what helps you. It doesn't matter if nobody else understands it. All that matters is that you're doing something to help yourself.
And I think that's a really good point. And actually, I've kind of thought about another closing question, which is more from the side of someone who knows someone with CFS and wants to support them. And the question is, based on our conversation, what advice would you give to someone who, again, knows someone with CFS, wants to support them, and they're in a situation where, as we said, there has been a curveball, chronic fatigue has just come out of the blue, and they're there, and they might not know what to do because, again, it's happened quite suddenly, and it is a curveball, just has to be dealt with there and then. What is the best way to support them, especially when those curveball hits out of the blue?
Just listen to them and what they say they need. CFS is a very complicated illness that affects everybody differently. Everybody has different things that will help them. So, say you know two people with CFS, they're going to be affected differently. They're going to have different things that will help them. Work out what helps them. If they're in a point where they can answer, let them explain to you what would help. If not, just support them and then ask for future reference, I suppose, afterwards. But just having that awareness that it's different for everybody. There's not a one size fits all help for CFS.
Sorry, I'm just going to charge my laptop. I'll edit this out. Why have I done this to myself? That's done, yeah. I'll edit that part out, of course. Pause for it. No, I think that's a really good point, and it's almost like what you're saying is let them lead, if that
Yeah,
makes sense. Let them kind of tell you what they need, and sometimes that's not always going to be easy because they might not be able to explain what they need very coherently, but it's just let them take the lead rather than you kind of assuming what they need. Is that
Yeah,
accurate?
definitely. And I know in that moment, it's really hard to explain what you need. So sometimes you will need the person supporting will need to make decisions. But as best you can, just listen to what they say they need.
No, definitely. It's a really good point. But yeah, thank you again for your time. How can people find you if they want to get in contact with you?
I've got an Instagram account, Chronically Doing Life. So probably through that.
Yep, and I will make sure I kind of highlight that when this episode gets published. But yeah, I think this was a really interesting episode, and I definitely found that there are things that I wasn't aware of about chronic fatigue syndrome, but from our conversation, I've learned from. And especially what is quite interesting about this is kind of that balance between, people talk about when it comes to anything is just self-care, coping strategies, all that, but also that balance of knowing that can be there, but also one thing that you also need to prepare for is when curveball happens, what do you do? And sometimes it is just a case of there is no way you can prepare for a curveball in advance, and you just have to wing it there and then.
Yeah.
But I think that was a really interesting takeaway, and it is one that I would say is probably the most important takeaway from this episode is that balance between having plans but being able to somehow wing it as there and then if you need to. But yeah, thank you for your time again, Elia. It was great having you on the episode, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Yep,
Thank
speak
you for
soon.
having me.
Yep, speak soon. Please support this podcast by subscribing and giving your feedback. I would love to hear your thoughts and always happy to discuss further. To get in contact, you can find me on Instagram on Niraj/travels.